What is going on, everybody? Hope everyone is doing well. My name is Jason, and in today's video, I wanted to talk a little bit about the Montreal Alouettes and how they've largely proved me wrong so far this season. I predicted in the offseason, or the preseason that is, that they would finish with 5 wins this year, go with the 5-13 record, but they've already reached that 5-win total, already 8 games into the season, so let's talk about them. So heading into this season, I had a lot of questions about the Alouettes, mainly because they had turnover at such key positions on a football team, arguably the three most important positions on a CFL roster or CFL team, and those are the quarterback position, where they lost Trevor Harris and traded him out for Cody Fajardo. We saw that Cody Fajardo had a couple of down years the last couple of years in Saskatchewan, so I wasn't sure how that was going to go. They also lost their head coach in Danny Machocha to he actually became the GM again and stepped down from the head coaching role. They brought in Jason Moss to fill that role. Moss didn't necessarily succeed in that role previously in stops in Edmonton as well. So I think that was a big question going into the season for me with the Alouettes. And then on top of that, they lost their number one receiver in Eugene Lewis, who I consider to be the best receiver in the CFL going into this season. So I think those were huge question marks I had about the Alouettes, and I thought that given that turnover this offseason, that was going to really hold them back to start this year. But honestly, it hasn't really affected them. I thought that Cody Fajardo and Jason Moss have really rewritten the narrative on what they've accomplished previously in Saskatchewan. I think that they've done a really good job steadying the ship so far this season and have arguably been the best quarterback head coach tandem outside of Toronto in the East Division so far this season. And on top of that, the receivers have more than answered the bell so far this season. A lot of guys stepping up. Austin Mack has came out of nowhere to become one of the best receivers in the Canadian Football League as a rookie. Keon Julian Grant has really showed his potential as a star Canadian receiver. A bunch of other guys that have really stepped up their game as well. So I think that that's a big reason why the Alouettes find themselves with a 5-3 record, 8 games into the season. And now let's talk about their season so far. So the Alouettes started their season week 1 against Ottawa at home. They won this game in a really scrappy game, 19-12. I remember this being pretty ugly. Both sides didn't really generate much offense in this one, but Montreal comes away with a week 1 victory in their first game under Cody Fajardo at quarterback. And I thought that was really impressive in terms of the defense in that game, but overall wasn't overly impressed with the offense. Then in week 3, because they have a week 2 bye, they destroyed Hamilton on the road 38-12 in a game that I attended. They really just mopped the floor with Hamilton in that game in all 3 phases. They had a big punt return touchdown from Chandler Worthy in that game, but also I think Cody Fajardo had arguably his best game of the season to this point in that one as well. So that really announced him as, a full-time, starter for the Alouettes and, potential star going forward for the Alouettes. So I thought that was really impressive in week 3 to get them off to a 2-0 start. And then they hit a bit of a rough patch here starting in week 4 where they start to lose 3 games in a row here as they play arguably the 3 best teams in the Canadian Football League so far this season. Week 4, they lose 17-3 at home against Winnipeg on Canada Day. And that was an ugly game just because of, they had a lot of weather problems there in Montreal that day. I thought that the defense played pretty well against Winnipeg, but I think that the offense just couldn't get anything going. They had a couple of untimely turnovers in the red zone. So they lose to Winnipeg in that one in pretty convincing fashion. And then the next week they play at BC and they lose pretty convincingly again, 35-19. BC just showing to be a much more explosive offense. And I still do believe that they're much more explosive than Montreal. We'll see them playing BC again in a couple of weeks here, but they didn't really stand a chance in that matchup in Vancouver. And then week 6, they lose again 35-27 at home against Toronto in an excellent game. I thought this went back and forth. I thought that both quarterbacks, Kelly and Fajardo, both played very well in that game. And I thought that was really impressive to see. It's really the only time this season that the Alouettes defense has really been lit up so far this year. So I think that, combined with the previous week, of course, but I think that overall the defense has been really, really good so far this season, with the exception of those 2 games against BC and Toronto. And then they get back in their winning ways week 8 against Calgary. And I think this was a really tough game to watch personally because there wasn't a single offensive touchdown, very misleading score. Both teams kicked 6 field goals in that game. But overall, I thought that Montreal's defense was really excellent in that one. KB and Ento, a really, really good rookie defensive back for this team. And that's another thing with this team. They have so many quality defensive backs, and they've been able to rotate and withstand injuries back there so far this season. And I think that's a main source behind having such a great defense so far this season, because I think their pass rush has been lacking at times, but I think their coverage unit has just been excellent. And they were able to get a victory there at home against Calgary and break that 3-game losing streak. Then week 9, they win at Hamilton again, 27-14 in comeback fashion. They outscored the Ticats 18-0 in the fourth quarter in a game that I again attended, and I think that really was a statement in saying that we are the second best team in the East. It's not really particularly close at this point, given the 2 matchups we've seen between Hamilton and Montreal to this point. Montreal, of course, beat Ottawa week 1, so we'll have to see how they play this week against Ottawa to see how Ottawa's changed since that that opening game of the season. So I think that in this week 9 matchup, I thought that was really impressive for the Alouettes to come back and really make a statement in that second half after having a pretty poor first half of that game. I believe they were trailing 14-3 at halftime. So they win the season series over the Ticats, which could be huge later on. They're effectively 3 games up on the Ticats. The Ticats are 3-5 at this point in time as of the recording of this video, whereas the Alouettes are 5-3. So if these two teams end up tied at the end of the season, the Alouettes have that tiebreaker in their pocket as well. And then last week against Saskatchewan, they win 41-12 in a game that Caleb Evans started in place of Cody Fajardo, who got injured late in that game against Hamilton. And, I mean, this was really just the defense taking over. The running game was the big source of the game plan in that one for the Alouettes. And I think that was impressive because Walter Fletcher was the running back in that one, William Stanback, who has had kind of an up-and-down season. He's had a couple of good games, but overall it's just been kind of pedestrian. I think his average is under 5 yards on the season, which, I mean, that's really the bar you want to hit in the CFL. But I think overall Fletcher really stepped in very, very well for Stanback in that one, and Jeshurun Antwi had a couple of nice runs as well for the Alouettes, who didn't really need much on offense to beat the Rough Riders, who are really struggling right now with their quarterback play, and they win convincingly there in their biggest blowout of the season, 41-12 at home. So overall, when you look at it, the thing that stands out to me in their game so far this season is that this defense has only allowed 20 points twice, and that is against BC and Toronto. Every other game, look at these numbers, 12 points here, 12 points there, 17 only in a loss there to Winnipeg, and then obviously the 35 points there, the 18, 14, 12. They haven't given up a lot of points this year, and the defense, I think, is the big story for the Alouettes this season. Noel Thorpe, the defensive coordinator, has done a really, really good job, again, with the defensive backs playing very, very well for this team this year. Got veterans like Seontae Evans, and then combine that with young emerging stars like Marc-Antoine Dequoy and KB and Antol back there, and I mean, they had another guy emerge this week, Reggie Stubblefield. They just keep on producing these defensive backs that other teams in the league, they haven't been able to do this year, so I think that's been really, really impressive for the Alouettes this season and has been a main source of their success. Now, in terms of their upcoming schedule, Week 11, they're at Ottawa, so that's this week. I think that should be an interesting game because Ottawa has played very competitive games so far this year, especially since Dustin Crum's come into the fold. So I'm interested to see if the Alouettes can, follow up that Week 1 win with another win against Ottawa, a very different Ottawa team in Week 11. Week 12, they're at Winnipeg. That should be an interesting game given that they lost to Winnipeg earlier this year. That's a trend in the first part of their season, is that they've beaten everybody else except for really the big 3 Grey Cup contenders in the CFL this season in Winnipeg, Toronto, and BC as well. So I think that it should be interesting to see if they can get a win against one of those top 3 Grey Cup contenders, if you will, the rest of the season. And they're going to have a gauntlet to run here with the Winnipeg, Week 13 against BC, and then Week 14 they're at Toronto. Week 15 they're actually at home against Toronto as well. So 4 games in a row against those top 3 teams in the CFL. So we're really going to see what this team is made of. A potential collapse is possible here, but I think this team was worthy of a video just because of already hitting their predicted win total I had for them already this season. But I think the Alouettes, they've won enough games that they're going to stay afloat no matter what they do in this stretch. I think they have Calgary in Week 16. That should be a win for them. Given what we saw them do against Calgary earlier this year. I do think they'll probably win this week against Ottawa, so those are 2 more wins here, and then the schedule will probably lighten up after that game against Calgary in Week 16. So I'm interested to see how the rest of their season goes, but before we get out of here, let's talk about some of their statistical leaders. So in terms of their passing leader, it is, of course, Cody Fajardo, who has played in 7 games this season, just missing the 1 game this past week. Has 1,877 passing yards to go along with 6 touchdown passes and 5 interceptions, averaging 9.3 yards per attempt, a very healthy number, and completing 67% of his passes. And overall, I've been pretty impressed with Fajardo. He's taking care of the ball for the most part, which is the biggest thing that he really didn't do last year in Saskatchewan. So I'm interested to see how he does the rest of the season and if he can continue his success from the first half. Hasn't thrown a ton of touchdowns. He's ran in a few. I don't have the rushing stats on the board. It ran out of room there. But I think that he's done, in general, pretty well so far this year. So I'm excited to see how he does the rest of the season. The rushing leader is William Stanback, who, like I said, has had some interesting moments so far this year. I think that he's had a couple of really good games, especially the games against Hamilton. He's had success, but I think overall he's been pretty pedestrian, averaging 4.9 yards per carry and having 416 rushing yards to this point this season. He's only played the 7 games. He, of course, missed last week, and Walter Fletcher and Jeshurun Antwi took the reins in the running back room. So we'll see if that injury lingers going forward, but I don't think it's serious from what I've heard. He's also added 17 receptions for 165 yards, so making an impact in the passing game as well. Not really known as a guy that's a great pass catcher of the football, but has had some production this year in that regard. And then the big story, I think, with this entire team this year is the emergence of Austin Mack, who I think is the front runner for CFL Rookie of the Year. I think it's honestly, he's a runaway favorite. Really the Dalton Schoen of this year. 8 games played, 39 receptions for 657 receiving yards, which is first in the CFL, in the entire CFL, ladies and gentlemen. And he's just been a revelation. I mean, this is a guy that, you look at his pedigree, he's went to school at Ohio State. He looks like a guy that should have been in the National Football League, but we're lucky enough to have him here in the CFL, and he's really been lighting up CFL defenses so far this season. Has really became that #1 receiver that they lost with Eugene Lewis heading out the door this offseason. He also has 3 touchdowns and has averaged 16.8 yards per reception, which is a really good bar to hit. Anytime you're averaging over 15 yards per reception, that is pretty elite in my opinion. So really, really strong season from Austin Mack, and I think he is this team's MOP candidate as of right now. And then in terms of their defensive leaders, Tyrese Beverett, a linebacker slash defensive back kind of hybrid player, really good, versatile player. He has 39 tackles on the season, has been an impact player for them in the front 7. And then in terms of sacks for this team, Sean Lemon has 3 sacks in 3 games played. Just signing mid-season here, made an immediate impact with this organization. Already has an interception from that game against Hamilton a couple of weeks ago as well. So he's been kind of the missing piece, I think, for this defense, because I think when you look at it, they just didn't have that great pass rusher, and Lemon is really the missing piece to that, because they have all the other components, I think, on that defense. The secondary, as I mentioned a couple of times, really, really strong play so far this year. Linebackers have been solid. The play calling defensively has been really good. But they've had to generate pressure in different ways so far this year. But now with Lemon in the fold, you have a really proven CFL pass rusher who is closing in on 100 career CFL sacks. Only 3, like I said, but has only played 3 games so far this season. Let's see what he finishes with. And then in terms of interceptions, it's interesting as well. Their leader is Deontay Evans, who has, I think this is a misprint, I think he has 3 on the season. I put 2 on the board, but I believe it was 3 interceptions he's had. But he's only played the first 2 games of the year before being placed on the injured list. So I think that it really shows you the depth of this team, that they've been able to withstand the loss of Deontay Evans. And I think that, like I said, those young stars and their ability to replace players in the secondary has been really impressive over the past couple of years in Montreal. But that is just today's video on the Alouettes and how they've largely proved me wrong so far this season with a 5-3 record. Be sure to let me know in the comments section, what record do you think the Alouettes ultimately end up finishing with? How many of those games coming up against Winnipeg, BC, Toronto, and Toronto again, do they end up winning? Do they, lose all of them again? Do they really prove they're not in the same class as those top 3 teams? Please let me know. And with that said, hope you guys have a great day, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace.